I came to Nashville because no one knew my name here. In a city where music poured from every street corner and strangers passed each other with nods that meant nothing, I thought I could disappear. Ordinary was all I wanted. Ordinary meant no one asked why I always sat with my back to the wall. Ordinary meant people saw only a woman in her late 30s, serving beer and carrying trays, not someone who once carried a rifle across deserts and mountains far from home. Blue Lantern wasn't the kind of bar you saw in tourist brochures. It was a roadside place, tucked just off the highway, where the neon sign flickered more nights than it worked. The wood floors groaned with age, the stools leaned when someone heavy sat down, and the jukebox in the corner only played half the songs it promised. But to me, it was sanctuary. The rhythm of wiping down counters, of folding napkins into perfect triangles, of refilling glasses with steady hands. It gave me something predictable when my own memories were anything but. Most people called me quiet, and I let them. They thought I was shy, or maybe just a woman who had seen her share of disappointments. They weren't wrong, but they weren't close to the truth either. The truth was heavier, carved into me in ways no one could see. Behind the bar, on the top shelf where no customer would look, I kept a small brass compass in a tin box. Its needle no longer found north. It spun lazily as if confused by the world. Scratched into the lid was a simple engraving. "Find your way back." Monsieur Mark had given it to me before his last deployment. He never came back, but the compass did. I never showed it to anyone. Some nights, when the music was soft and the bar was nearly empty, I would press my thumb over those letters until my eyes stung. That compass was a weight and a lifeline all at once. On Fridays, the bar filled with truck drivers, construction crews, and a few veterans who carried their own silence with them. They never said much about what they had seen, and I never asked. Sometimes our eyes would meet, and in that glance we both understood more than words could cover. But mostly, we stayed strangers, safe that way. I had learned to keep my voice calm and my steps even, no matter what kind of chaos might swirl around me. If a man got too drunk and slammed his fist on the counter, I smiled politely and brought him water. If a couple argued in the corner booth, I collected empty glasses as though I couldn't hear them. Being invisible was an art, and I had mastered it. But even as I convinced myself this life of silence and small routines was enough, there was always a restlessness under my skin. A Marine never truly retires, not in her bones. You can bury uniforms in storage, you can fold medals into boxes, but your body remembers the drills, the vigilance, the sense that danger always has a way of walking through the door. That night began, like all the others. I checked the taps, polished the counter, tied my apron. The band tuned their guitars and the hum of strings filled the room. I told myself it would be another ordinary night, that no one would look at me twice, that I could keep living in the shadows. But deep down, I felt something shifting, the way you feel the air change before a storm. The music started slow that evening, a country ballad about lost love and cheap whiskey. The regulars tapped their boots, some singing along. I moved between tables, balancing drinks, keeping my head down. The air smelled of fried food and cigarette smoke, familiar and oddly comforting. At one table, a group of roofers fresh off work laughed too loud, slapping the table with calloused hands. At another, a retired soldier named Hank nursed his single beer the way he always did, slow and steady, like stretching out time. He wore a ball cap pulled low, and though he rarely spoke, he always tipped in exact change, as if ritual mattered more than generosity. I kept watch without letting it show. Every few minutes my eyes flicked to the door. Old habits die hardest of all. Once, years ago, I told myself I would stop scanning entrances and exits, stop counting how many strangers were in the room, Stopped noticing which ones carried themselves like they had training, but my body never listened. It stayed alert even when my heart wanted rest. A drunk leaned too far across the bar and tried to flirt. His words were slurred, harmless enough, but his hand brushed my arm. I stepped back quickly, careful not to spill his drink, and gave a polite smile that meant enough. He laughed, muttered an apology, and turned back to his friends. To anyone watching, it was nothing. To me, it was one more reminder of why I preferred to be unseen. As I wiped down a table, my eyes drifted to the stage where the guitar player leaned into his microphone. Music always pulled something loose inside me. It reminded me of nights when Mark strummed chords on our back porch, his voice low, his laughter quick. For a moment, I let myself feel it. The warmth of being loved, the ache of losing it. My hand paused on the rag, and I caught my breath before anyone could notice. But the stillness didn't last. There are nights when silence feels like a warning, when you know without knowing that something is coming. The hairs on my neck prickled. I glanced again at the door, and though it was still closed, I felt the storm gathering on the other side. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the Marine in me refusing to rest. I tried to sink back into the rhythm of work, to let the song carry me. But deep down, my instincts whispered what I didn't want to admit. This wasn't going to be an ordinary night. The first warning wasn't sight, it was sound. A low growl cut through the music, and for a second the guitar strings on stage seemed to falter, as if they knew they couldn't compete. The sound grew louder, closer, until it rattled the windows and pressed against the chest like a heartbeat gone wrong. Every conversation in the blue lantern slowed, then stopped. Forks hovered in midair, boots froze mid-tap, and the laughter that had filled the room drained away. All that remained was the roar of engines outside and the steady thrum of my own pulse. I'd heard engines like that before, in desert towns half a world away, when convoys rolled through and the ground shook beneath them. My body reacted before my mind could reason. It stiffened, alert, bracing for impact. But this wasn't a war zone. It was Nashville, a Friday night, a bar where I folded napkins for tips. I whispered that truth to myself, but the unease stayed. 6 bikes lined up along the curb like predators sniffing at the edge of light. Their chrome caught the neon glow, throwing sharp glints across the windows. When the doors finally pushed open, the music died altogether. They walked in as if the room already belonged to them. Black leather vests, steel wolf patches, heavy boots striking the floor in rhythm. At the front was Rex Dalton, taller than most, with a shaved head and tattoos climbing up his neck like vines. His presence sucked the air from the room. He scanned the space the way a man surveys territory he intends to claim. I carried a tray of empty glasses back to the bar, my steps even though my pulse wasn't. Instinct told me to keep calm, to blend into the furniture, but instinct also told me this was no casual visit. Trouble had found its way through the door and it had teeth. The regulars knew it too. Hank lowered his beer and shifted in his seat, jaw tightening. The roofers who had been laughing minutes ago stared at their drinks, suddenly quiet. On stage, the band looked at one another, unsure whether to keep playing. Silence felt safer, so silence won. Rex stopped in the middle of the floor, spreading his arms as if to greet old friends. "Evening," he said, voice low but sharp enough to cut. "Don't mind us, we're just here to enjoy a drink." But his smile never reached his eyes. I had seen that kind of smile before, the one men wore before they asked for something you couldn't give. It was the same smile that preceded checkpoints, threats, ultimatums. A smile that promised nothing good. I kept my gaze on the floor as I moved past, balancing a tray with 3 half-empty bottles. To anyone watching, I was just a bartender doing her job, a woman too timid to meet a stranger's eyes. That was fine by me. Let them think me small. But Rex didn't let me pass. His hand brushed the edge of the tray, forcing me to stop. "You work here?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Yes, sir," I answered softly, steadying the bottles so they wouldn't spill. "Then you'll do." His voice carried just enough for the room to hear. "We're offering your boss a chance to keep this place safe. 1,000 a month, and nothing bad happens here." The words slid into the room, like oil on water, coating everything. I heard chairs creak as men shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. They were measuring the cost of defiance, the price of silence. I swallowed, kept my eyes lowered. "I just serve drinks," I said. Rex chuckled, the sound rough, humorless. "Then you can serve him the message. Tell your boss the Iron Wolves own this stretch now. He pays, or this place burns." The tray in my hands felt heavier. My fingers curled tight around the glasses, knuckles whitening, but I forced my posture to stay small. Appearing fragile had kept me safe this long, but even as I bowed my head, I catalogued every detail: where his men stood, how their boots angled, who blocked which exits. Old habits again, surfacing like shadows I could never quite outrun. He leaned closer, his breath thick with whiskey. "You look like a smart girl. Convince your boss, and maybe I'll make sure you're taken care of. Better than minimum wage and tips, I promise you that." The room felt smaller with every word. The air pressed tight. I wanted to retreat into silence, to fold into the background the way I always had. But I also knew storms don't pass just because you keep your head down. I lifted the tray, excused myself softly, and walked toward the bar. Behind me, Rex laughed, loud and cruel, the sound of someone who thought he had already won. I placed the tray down with steady hands, though inside I was anything but steady. Trouble had arrived, bold and uninvited, and I knew, deep down, this was only the beginning. The night was already heavy, but it broke open with a sound I'll never forget. Not the crash of a bottle, not the scrape of a chair. Cloth. The ripping of fabric, sharp and merciless, echoing louder than any fight. Rex had grown tired of my quiet refusals. His hand clamped down on my collar, yanking me forward so hard the tray behind me rattled. For a moment I thought he might let go. Instead, with one sudden jerk, he tore the front of my shirt wide open. The room gasped. A woman near the jukebox cried out. Someone dropped a glass that shattered on the floor, and I stumbled back, clutching at the ruined cotton, but it was too late. Under the shredded shirt was a black tank top that clung close, and on my shoulder blades, beneath the thin fabric, the ink was impossible to miss. The eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps spread across my back. Every line sharp, every feather etched by hands that knew what they were drawing. Silence hit the room harder than any fist. The band stopped mid-chord. The regulars froze, staring not at Rex, not at his men, but at me. The tattoos told a story, one I had buried for years. Force Recon. The kind of unit people whispered about. The ones sent first into the fire and last to leave. But that wasn't what made my chest tighten as every eye fell on me. It was the second detail, the one no one should have seen. Just below the emblem, in smaller script, two letters joined by a plus sign, M+C, Fallujah 2004, Mark and Claire. A battlefield, a year, a promise inked into my skin when we were young enough to believe we were indestructible. Now it glowed under the lights, a secret torn into the open by a man who thought he was proving my weakness. Rex blinked, confusion flickering in his hard eyes. He expected fear. What he saw was something else entirely. I heard the shift before I saw it. Chairs scraping as men stood straighter, boots planting firm. Hank, the quiet veteran with his ball cap pulled low, raised his head for the first time that night. His eyes locked on my back, and I recognized the look. the recognition of someone who'd walked the same ground. Fallujah, he whispered, more to himself than to me. The word carried across the silence like a prayer. My stomach twisted. I hadn't wanted anyone here to connect those dots. But the ink betrayed me. It told them not only who I was, but who I had loved and lost. Rex tried to laugh, though it came out brittle. What's this? Some tattoo trick to scare us? You think ink makes you dangerous? But no one in the room laughed with him. The balance had shifted, and he felt it. His bravado cracked as he realized he had torn open something he didn't understand. I drew in a slow breath, squared my shoulders. For the first time that night, I met his eyes. My voice was calm, steady, carrying further than I expected. You didn't just rip my shirt, I said. You ripped open a memory you'll never understand. I didn't raise my fists, didn't make a single threatening move. I simply turned enough for everyone to see, for the veterans in the room to read the letters, to feel the weight behind them. It wasn't about intimidation. It was about truth. A murmur swept through the bar. One of the younger men by the door whispered to his buddy, "That's Force Recon. She's the real thing." But what stung me wasn't the respect. It was the ache in my chest. Those letters under my skin weren't there to impress anyone. They were a promise. A reminder of a love that hadn't survived the war. I had carried Mark into every day since, even when I told myself I was trying to forget. Rex's hand fell from my collar. His fingers twitched as though unsure what to do. His men shifted uneasily behind him, their circle loosening. They had swaggered in like wolves, but now they stared like boys who'd stumbled into something holy. For a moment, no one moved. The jukebox clicked, searching for the next track but never finding one. The air itself felt suspended. And then, from the corner, Hank stood up. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled off his ball cap and pressed it to his chest. His voice carried across the stillness. "I knew a Mark Donovan," he said. "Fallujah, 2004. Good man." My throat closed, my vision blurred. I hadn't heard Mark's name spoken aloud in years, not like that, not by someone who had been there. The room tilted, my knees nearly gave, but I stayed standing. Because Marines stand, even when everything inside them breaks. The wolves had wanted to show dominance. Instead, they had stripped me bare, and in doing so revealed not power but a wound that never healed. And yet, in that wound, there was strength. Not the kind Rex understood. The kind built from love, from sacrifice, from promises written into skin so they could never be erased. I lifted my chin. "You wanted to know who I am," I told him softly. "Now you do." The room held its breath, waiting to see what would come next. For a moment, I thought the storm had passed. Rex had stepped back, his bravado cracking, the room silent except for the faint buzz of neon. My secret was out, and with it came the weight of respect and sorrow in equal measure. I almost believed that would be enough, but there's always one who can't read a room. From the back of the pack, a younger biker pushed forward. He couldn't have been older than 25, wiry with restless energy. His vest hung loose on his shoulders, his fists balled like he had something to prove. His eyes darted between me and Rex, searching for courage in the wrong places. "This is a joke," he spat, his voice breaking the silence like shattering glass. "Ink and war stories don't scare me. She's just a waitress, a washed-up Marine trying to play tough." The words hung heavy, but worse was the laugh that followed. A laugh that mocked every scar, every ghost I carried under my skin. He stepped closer, chest puffed, trying to reclaim what Rex had lost. The others shifted uncomfortably. They knew better. They had seen enough to recognize the shift in the room, the way veterans in the crowd had straightened, the way Rex himself had faltered. But pride is poison, And this young man had swallowed too much of it. He shoved a chair aside, the legs screeching against wood. I don't care what she's hiding under her shirt. I'll show you she bleeds like anyone else. The veterans at their tables tensed. Hank half rose from his seat, but I raised my hand slightly, stopping him. My voice was calm, almost soft. Sit down, Hank. This one's mine. Because I knew what this was. Not about me, not even about him. It was about every young man who thinks violence proves his worth. It was about every battle where arrogance walked in first and wisdom came limping behind. The biker grinned when he saw I wasn't moving. He mistook stillness for weakness. He mistook calm for surrender. He lunged. Training doesn't disappear. It sleeps under the skin, waiting. In the instant he lunged, my body remembered what my mind had tried to forget. I sidestepped, smooth and efficient. His momentum carried him past me, and with a small twist of my wrist, I caught his arm and redirected it downward. He crashed onto the floorboards, his breath leaving him in a startled grunt. I didn't hit him. I didn't need to. The bar went silent again, the only sound his labored breathing as he tried to rise. I knelt beside him, my voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. You think scars are weakness? You think love written into skin is a joke? But every line of this ink cost blood. Every letter carved here was paid for in fire and loss. That's not weakness. That's what kept me alive. His eyes flickered, confusion overtaking arrogance. For the first time he saw me, not a waitress, not a target, but someone who had walked through fire and come out carrying names he would never know. I loosened my grip, let him scramble backward toward his crew. The room exhaled as though holding breath too long. Veterans nodded quietly. Civilians leaned forward, watching something they didn't fully understand, but felt all the same. Rex's jaw tightened, shame twisting his face. His men shifted, torn between loyalty and the new weight pressing on the room. Respect had changed sides, and they knew it. I stood, smoothed my torn shirt though it was beyond saving. My hands shook, not from fear, but from memory. Because in that moment, Mark was with me again. His laughter, his hand steadying mine, his promise that we'd always find our way back. I looked at the younger biker who now avoided my gaze. Strength isn't about proving you can hurt someone. It's about carrying pain without letting it turn you cruel. The words weren't just for him. They were for me, too. For the years I had hidden, convincing myself invisibility was safer than living. I turned back to Rex, my voice steadier now. You brought your wolves here thinking fear would buy you power, but fear doesn't last. Respect does. And you'll leave this place knowing you'll never earn it here. For the first time that night, Rex didn't answer. His silence was admission enough. But I knew this wasn't over. Wolves don't retreat without nursing a grudge, and part of me, part of the Marine I still was, knew they'd test me again. I also knew something else. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding anymore. My scars, my ink, my love, they were out in the open. And the bar, the people, the veterans, they had seen me. All of me. The storm hadn't ended. It had only shifted. And deep down, I was ready. When the wolves finally pulled back, the blue lantern felt like it had been hollowed out. The hum of neon returned, but softer. People moved, slowly, as though afraid sound itself might invite trouble back in. I stayed behind the bar, folding what was left of my torn shirt, piece by piece, like it was a ritual. My hands wanted something to do. My heart didn't. No one spoke to me directly, not at first. The regulars glanced my way, quick and guilty, as if staring too long at my scars would make them theirs. Hank caught my eye once, his jaw tight with the weight of recognition, then gave me the smallest of nods. Respect, solidarity, and pity. I hated the Pity. Jake, the young bartender, hovered at the edge of the counter. His lips parted once, then closed again. He didn't know what to say, and truth be told, I didn't want him to. I wasn't ready for questions I didn't have answers to. So I cleaned. I stacked glasses. I wiped down the bar in precise squares, one cloth length at a time. I restored order where I could, because chaos had already taken enough. But the compass in my pocket felt heavier that night, like it was pulling at me. Mark's compass. The little brass thing he had pressed into my hand the day we deployed, telling me, "If you lose your way, this will remind you where home is." The funny part was, it hadn't pointed north since the blast that killed him. Maybe that was fitting. Maybe north didn't matter anymore. I touched it through the fabric, my chest tightening. The ink on my back wasn't just a mark of service. It was a love letter that had outlived the man who wrote it with me. And now, everyone knew. I hadn't spoken Mark's name in years, not out loud. But in the silence of that bar, I heard it like he was standing beside me. We met in the desert, two kids playing soldier in a war that wasn't a game. He was reckless where I was cautious, laughter where I was quiet. We balanced each other, or maybe we just believed we did. In places where tomorrow was never guaranteed, love came fast and burned bright. I remember the day we inked our promise. Fallujah, 2004. A lull in the chaos. A backroom artist working with half-broken needles and cheap ink. M+C. Fallujah. He said it was our way of leaving something permanent in a place where everything else could be blown apart. 2 weeks later, the convoy was hit. I still see the fire when I close my eyes. I still hear the ringing in my ears from the blast. I remember clawing at the sand, looking for him, the compass warm in my palm. But all I found was silence. I carried him home in scars, in nightmares, in that small brass compass that never pointed north again. And when the Corps sent me back stateside, I carried him into a life that didn't fit. People said I was strong. They didn't see the nights I woke up screaming. They didn't see the way I folded in on myself, until ordinary felt safer than extraordinary. That's why I ended up here. Nashville, a bar where nobody knew who I was, where the only battles were spilled drinks and late-night arguments over country songs. A place where I could disappear. But now the wolves had ripped that open. They hadn't just torn my shirt. They'd torn down the walls I'd built, brick by brick. Everyone knew now. The veterans saw a sister in arms. The civilians saw a survivor. But all I felt was exposed. I leaned against the counter, pressing my hand over the compass in my pocket. My voice stayed inside, but the words were clear. "Mark, I tried to bury us, but tonight, they dug you back up." The band started playing again, soft and shaky. Life resumed in fits and starts, but for me, something had shifted. I wasn't just hiding anymore. I was remembering, and remembering hurt. I thought the night had ended when the wolves rode off. But trouble doesn't vanish just because the engines fade. Trouble waits. It was close to midnight when the knock came. Not a polite tap, not the thump of a drunk regular wanting one last beer. It was deliberate, heavy. The kind of sound that told you whoever was outside wasn't asking. The Blue Lantern was quieter by then. Most of the patrons had gone home, leaving only a handful of veterans nursing late coffees and Jake behind the bar wiping glasses in slow circles. I was rolling up chairs, compass in my pocket, when the sound froze us all. Jake looked at me, his face pale. They wouldn't come back. Not this soon. But they had. The door swung open before I could answer. 4 wolves stepped in. Not the whole pack this time. Just enough to prove a point. Their boots dragged grit across the floor. Rex wasn't with them. He had too much pride to risk another humiliation, but his orders were written all over their swagger. The youngest, the one I'd put on the floor earlier, lingered near the back. His eyes darted everywhere, still bruised by the memory of what had happened. The tallest of the group, a man with scars running from his temple down to his jaw, stepped forward. He slammed a chain onto the counter so hard Jake jumped. "Message from Rex," he growled. "This place pays, or this place burns." The veterans didn't move, but I saw their hands shift, old instincts waking up. Hank's jaw clenched. Maria, the florist who'd once been a Navy corpsman, stood taller, eyes narrowing. They were ready to fight. But this wasn't about fighting anymore. This was about standing. I set down the chair in my hand, slow and steady. My voice carried low but clear. "You've already tried fear," I said. "It didn't work. You won't scare us tonight, or any night." The man sneered. "Lady, you think that tattoo makes you untouchable?" "No," I said, pulling the compass from my pocket, holding it where the dim light caught the scratches. "But this does." He frowned, confused. The others leaned in, trying to see. "This compass doesn't point north anymore," I said. "It points here, to this room, to these people. You touch this place, you're not just fighting me. You're fighting everyone who knows what that ink means. And trust me, you don't want that fight." Silence. A line drawn. The scarred man laughed, low and mean. "Pretty speech. But speeches don't stop fire." He pulled a lighter from his pocket, flicking it open, the flame dancing. "Gasoline in the alley. One word from me and this place goes up." The veterans stiffened. Jake's breath hitched. My heart pounded, but not with fear, with clarity. I stepped closer, into the space where the flame quivered. My reflection glinted in his eyes, calm where he expected panic. "You think fire scares me?" I said. "I buried the man I loved because of fire. I carried him home in ashes and scars. You can't burn me worse than I've already been burned." The words cut sharper than I expected because they were true. I had hidden that truth for so long, but speaking it out loud steadied me. The biker's smirk faltered. His lighter trembled just slightly, and that was enough. Behind me, Hank's voice rose, solid as steel. "You heard her. This county's not yours anymore." Another veteran stood, then another. Chairs scraped, boots planted. The wolves looked around and saw not a bar full of civilians, but a wall of men and women who had already faced worse than anything they could bring. The young biker, the one I'd thrown down earlier, finally spoke. His voice cracked. "We should go." The scarred man shot him a glare, but the weight of the room had shifted. He snapped the lighter shut, chain rattling as he snatched it off the counter. "This ain't over," he muttered. I held his gaze. "No, it's over. You just don't know it yet." They backed toward the door, pride bleeding from their steps. Outside, their engines roared, but even that sound seemed smaller now. When the door shut, the room stayed quiet for a long beat. Then Maria let out a slow breath. "You didn't just protect this bar," she said softly. "You gave us our voice back." I slipped the compass into my pocket again, feeling its weight, heavier but somehow lighter at the same time. Maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't just stood for myself tonight. Maybe I'd stood for all of us. And deep down, I knew. Mark would have wanted it this way. I came back to the bar at dawn. The neon signs were off. The floor still smelled faintly of smoke even though nothing had burned. The chairs were crooked, the jukebox silent, the room bearing the scars of a night that had nearly broken it. But people were already waiting. Veterans I hadn't seen before stood outside, some in worn jackets with faded unit patches, others holding styrofoam cups of gas station coffee. Word had spread faster than fire ever could. One man, older than most, nodded as I unlocked the door. "Heard what you did," he said. thought maybe this was a place worth coming to. I didn't know how to answer, so I just stepped aside and let them in. By mid-morning, half the tables were full. No one ordered beer. They asked for coffee, black, and sat in circles like soldiers do when they don't need to explain themselves. Jake looked overwhelmed, juggling mugs and carafes, but his face glowed. "They came for you," he whispered when he passed me. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say they came for each other. But the compass in my pocket reminded me, leadership isn't about wanting it, it's about stepping up when you're called. By noon, Maria had arrived with fresh flowers, setting them in mason jars, on the tables. Hank brought a box of old photographs, sand-colored uniforms, young faces half lost to memory. He pinned them to the corkboard near the jukebox. The Blue Lantern wasn't just a bar anymore. It was becoming something else, something sacred. And I, whether I liked it or not, was at the center. That evening, I finally allowed myself to sit. The veterans had formed a circle near the stage, voices low but steady. They were telling stories, the kind only other veterans understood. Losses spoken of in first names, laughter at absurd moments of fear, silences that said more than words ever could. A young woman sat apart from the group, her hands clenched in her lap. She couldn't have been more than 23. Her eyes carried the same thousand-yard stare I'd once seen in the mirror. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "How do you go back to normal after everything?" The circle went quiet. They looked at me. I swallowed, my throat dry. For years I had buried this question. For years I had no answer. But tonight, with the weight of their eyes, I felt something shift. "You don't," I said quietly. "Normal isn't waiting for us. We come back different. We carry names and scars and moments that never leave. But that doesn't mean we're broken. It means we're forged. We build a new life with the pieces left, and we do it together." The young woman's eyes welled. She nodded. A small motion, but it was enough. The compass felt warm in my pocket. For the first time, I didn't clutch it like a secret. I set it on the table, letting the brass catch the light. "This belonged to my husband," I said. "It stopped pointing north the day I lost him. I used to think that meant I was lost too. But maybe it just meant north wasn't the point anymore. Maybe the point was here." The room was silent, but not heavy. Silent like a prayer, like an answer settling over us all. That night, the Blue Lantern transformed completely. Not just a bar, not just a hiding place, but a haven. A place where veterans could belong, civilians could understand, and I could finally stop running. I realized then, I hadn't lost my mission. It had only changed. Weeks passed, and the Blue Lantern was no longer the quiet roadside bar it had been. The jukebox still played the same country songs, the stools were still chipped, and the neon beer sign still buzzed when it got too hot. But the air was different. Every Tuesday, veterans came from towns I'd never heard of. Some drove hours. They brought photos, medals, worn field jackets folded carefully under their arms. They filled the corkboard with faces, smiling, serious, missing. Each one a reminder that memory is a battlefield all its own. Civilians came too. Wives, brothers, sons who wanted to understand. They listened. They learned. And for once, no one flinched at the word war. I worked the bar as always, pouring coffee, wiping counters. But I no longer hunched my shoulders or kept my eyes down. When people thanked me for my service, I didn't hide behind silence. I accepted it, not as a burden, but as a truth. One night, Maria leaned across the counter, her hands smelling of the flowers she always brought. "You know what you've done, right?" she said. I shook my head. "You've turned this place into more than a bar. You've given us a home." Her words landed heavier than any chain or threat Rex ever threw at me, because she was right. The blue lantern wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who stepped inside carrying ghosts. And maybe that was what Mark had meant when he gave me the compass. Home wasn't a place, it was people. One evening, long after the crowd had thinned, I found myself alone with Jake. He was stacking chairs, his young face serious in a way most 20-somethings weren't. "You ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Serving? Fighting? All of it?" I paused, drying the last glass. My eyes drifted to the compass on the shelf behind the bar. Its brass casing caught the glow of the neon, steady, familiar. "Every day," I said softly. Then I smiled, the kind of smile that came after years of silence. And not once. Jake frowned, not understanding. He would someday. I picked up the compass, rolling it in my palm. For years, I'd thought it was broken, but as I stood there, surrounded by the hum of voices outside, the laughter of veterans finding connection, the warmth of something I hadn't felt in so long, I realized it had been pointing true all along. Not north. Here. I closed my hand around it. "Mark," I whispered inside myself. "You were right." I found my way back. The door creaked as the last veteran left, nodding to me on his way out. I locked it, turned off the neon, and stood in the quiet glow of the empty room. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt whole. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't just surviving. I was serving again. Different uniform, different mission, but the same vow. Always faithful. The blue lantern had become sacred ground. Not because of me, but because of us. Because together, we carried what was too heavy to bear alone. And as I placed the compass back on the shelf, I knew I wasn't lost. I was home.